a slightly old version. I've been actually at the CDR for 21 years. And I work a lot with the industry, and I'll talk more about that a little later. But really my reason for talking to you tonight is to give you a little background. The U.S. dairy, why did Wisconsin become the dairy state and the cheese state? So it didn't start out that way, okay? So originally, Wisconsin was populated back in the mid-1800s by Yankee farmers. Well, what's a Yankee? We think of them as a baseball player from New York, but Yankees were people from New England, and they were primarily of English and Scottish and Irish and Wales ancestry. And by the 1860s, so around the time of the Civil War, Wisconsin was the leading producing state for wheat in the country, and we were the breadbasket of the country. But so two bad things happened to the wheat industry at the same time. First, it had an insect infestation called a cinch bug. It's think of like having grasshoppers eat your crops. Well, a cinch bug isn't a grasshopper, but the same effect. And secondly, I don't know if any of you are from farming backgrounds, but what happens, or even if think of your garden, if you plant the same thing year after year after year, and this is long before they knew about chemical fertilizers and stuff, so what happens to the soil? You wear it out, right? So in the great American tradition, the Yankee farmers of that period, after they couldn't grow wheat anymore, what did they do? Nope. They moved. Manifest destiny, they moved west. I don't know if I think that's west probably, but they went west. And where do we grow wheat today? In the Great Plains, and that's where they went to. But luckily for Wisconsin, our soil, our topography, our climate, our rainfall was really well adapted for dairy farming, okay? So again, early years, 1840 to 1880, wheat was the dominant agricultural product in Wisconsin. You know, I don't know where you're all from originally, but if you go through central Wisconsin and stuff, you see a lot of mill ponds and stuff. What was the reason for those mill ponds? For water power to drive grist mills to grind the wheat into flour. That was why many of them were built, and that's what you see happening there. Okay, so that just shows a nice picture of that. I'll pass this book around. A number of my photos, which I did give credit to, came from this book. If you want to know about Wisconsin's agricultural history, that's a wonderful book. My Land, My Home, My Wisconsin. So why wheat? Why did those Yankee farmers like wheat? Important cash crop. Didn't take a lot of investment. You know, you didn't have to buy, you know, a lot of machinery and stuff. Easy to grow. Good financial return because flour, everybody needs flour, right? Pretty cheap farming, a product many people need. Plus it was kind of easy. You plant it in the spring, and then what do? Nothing until the fall, and then you harvest it and you're done. With cows, in contrast, you're milking cows twice every day, okay? So when I worked at Alto, I lived in Green Lake, and there's a mill pond in the dam there. Green Lake, then as now, population of around 1,000 people only, but it had 2 water-powered wheat grinding flour mills in that tiny town, because that's how important wheat was back in those mid-1800 years. But like I said, it was ravaged by cinch bugs, which looks like this bug down here, and they depleted the soil of nitrogen, so we couldn't grow wheat anymore. Well, at about that same time, there was mass emigration of people out of Europe who came to U.S. and many to Wisconsin, and they were ancestors like mine. My dad is a German ancestor, my mother is Swiss. So the Swiss and the Germans, Norwegians, the Swedes, the Danes, the French, the Italian, the Dutch, they came and they brought knowledge of how to do dairying, both on the farm side, and they also, like this nice Swiss cheese copper kettle picture, some of them knew how to make cheese. So they brought those traditions and skills with them from their homeland, and that's when dairying started to take off. So they built barns for their livestock. Now here's, as Heather knows, I love to give quizzes as we go along. So you see two barns here in this picture, right? And on the farm I grew up on, we had one that looked exactly like that without that part on, and a silo exactly like that, and we had one that looked like that. Okay, here's your quiz. What's this barn used for? It's a milking barn, correct. What's that barn used for? Sorry? Nope. I could tell you from southern Wisconsin because you think tobacco. What kind of barn is that? That's a wheat barn. That's where the straw from the wheat would go. They would thresh the wheat on the floor, those two big doors could, and they would thresh it in the middle. The straw would be stored on both sides, and then they'd take the wheat to a granary somewhere. Okay. Now, if you want to see a barn, in fact, that very barn, that picture, it's Old World, Wisconsin in Eagle. Okay. But we had a barn that looked exactly like that on our farm, right next to our milking barn, which was built in our farm in 1907. Okay. The other thing these people, these new immigrants from Europe knew, they knew animal care, and they knew the value of cow manure to fertilize the soil to grow crops. Okay, see this nice Amish picture here with the manure spreader. Okay, so the number of dairy cows started to take off. 1867, so a couple years after the end of the Civil War, only 245,000 dairy cows in Wisconsin. By 1912, a few years before World War I, almost 1.5 million. Okay, by 1945, the end of World War II, almost 2.6 million dairy cows. But look at this number, interesting. 2018, half, about 1.3 million. But look at this. Every cow here per lactation gave 24,000 pounds of milk, where in 1945 only 6. So the cow was 4 times more productive, so we didn't need as many cows. Okay. So, oh yeah, oh I'm sorry. Whenever you have questions, interrupt me. I love to have questions.
Is the strain of cows that are maybe
The breed, it's called breed.
similar, because I'm a different type of scientist. Similar from 1860 to
Yeah, they were Holstein dominant right from the start. Although I would say in the earlier days, and even in my history, you know, Wisconsin dairying, which goes 60 plus years, there used to be more what we call colored breeds, and I don't have that photo. I have it, but not in this presentation. So Jerseys, Guernseys, my personal favorite, Brown Swiss, Ayrshires, Milking Shorthorns. Holsteins were always the dominant one, also known as Friesian. But back then there were more colored breeds. But now, today, it's primarily Holstein and then Jersey, and then that's about it. A few of the others, but very few anymore.
So are these numbers because the Holstein is just that much better at putting out more milk?
Correct.
Or does this come down to like the HGH thing?
Uh,
Not HGH, whatever it is.
BGH? No. No, it had nothing to do with BGH. No. The Holsteins, because they just give so much more milk.
Sure.
That's why they.
Aren't they breeding, more selective breeding for like productivity and the genetics?
Correct. There's tons of genetics, and that's another reason why the Holstein now is super dominant too, because virtually all dairy cows are artificially inseminated these days, and they have. Well, if you drive up the highway, you see what's the ABS? ABS, yeah. There's just so much more genetics available for Holsteins than many of these other breeds. So, yes, they're breeding, and so breeding, the genetics, the feeding. They're fed like Olympic athletes with highly balanced nutrition and cow comfort. That's why they produce so much milk. Okay, so the father of American dairying and Wisconsin dairying was this gentleman, William Dempster Hord. And way back in the 1800s, he created this magazine called Hord's Dairyman, which was every farmer's best friend. And it would spread, every issue has pictures of cows on the front, always does. It's always been that size paper, you pass that around. And that kind of always provided information to dairy farmers about the greatest, newest, best practices for dairying, right? So he came from New York originally, migrated to Wisconsin just before the Civil War, lived in Fort Atkinson, and that farm, the Hord Farm, is still in existence today. And in fact, about 5 years ago, they started taking just their milk, taking it to a couple of independent cheese factories, and has Hord's cheese made. And I have one sample over here of their new cheese variety for you to try as well. So he was a very smart guy. Oh, by the way, if you ever want to see a bust of him, you know what Henry Mall is, right outside Egg Hall on campus? Right at the top end, by Egg Hall of Henry Mall, there's a bust of him on a big stone platform. But he saw the decline in wheat, and he said the farm economy in Wisconsin needed something to replace wheat, and he had come from New York State, which was the leading dairy state at the time, and he envisioned Wisconsin as the new dairy state in the United States, and his motto was substitute the cow for the plow, meaning don't plow the land for wheat, let's have the cow and grazing and things like that for milk production, okay? So when did the first Wisconsin cheese plant come about? Some people say 1841 near Watertown, Wisconsin. Ann Pickett, very small scale, but she started making cheese and taking milk from her neighbors and just making it in her own little area on her farm. Other people might argue Chester Hazen, 1864. So here's your next quiz. What little town in east central Wisconsin is known as the speed capital town of Wisconsin? Speed Trap. Rosendale. Sorry, Speed Trap. Yep. Well, it's just south of Rosendale on a crossroad. There's a couple buildings. It's called Ladoga. And just a quarter mile up the road from Ladoga was Chester Hazen's farm. And he built a cheese factory, freestanding. And he started with 100 cows, which back then a typical farm would probably only have 3, 4, 5 cows. So that was, you know, a lot of cows back then. By the end of the Civil War, 1865, he was bringing in milk from 200 cows. 5 years later, from 1,000 cows, and he started exporting cheese outside of Wisconsin, okay, very early on. So we have something called Wisconsin Originals. These are cheese varieties that were invented in Wisconsin. Okay, in 1877, brick cheese was invented, and I have some of that for you to try over there. Near Watertown by John Joshi. Okay, and why is it called brick? Well, I have a form you put the curd in is called a hoop in our industry, and this is a hoop for brick cheese. And see how it's kind of shaped by a brick? But in addition, see what he has in his left hand there? What they do is they put a little stainless plate on top and then put a brick on it to press the cheese so it fuses together. So it's shaped like a brick, and it's also pressed by a brick. And that's why they called it brick cheese. Now, what I brought you, because I'm a kind soul sometimes, is mild brick. But they also make something called smeared brick and aged brick, which smells and tastes almost as bad as Limburger. It smells right through the Limburger right through this. So this would taste like this, but not quite as bad. But I brought you the mild. Okay? Now, back in those days, okay, let me go back. How many Limburger factories are there in the United States today? 1, Chalet, just north of Monroe, Wisconsin. Back then, even in Greene County, there was 100 Limburger factories. There's only 1 left, okay? But the smeared brick, which was often also then made in a Limburger factory, was called Married Man's Limburger. Why? Because the new bride couldn't stand the breath of her husband after he ate Limburger. So in a compromise, she said, you could eat aged brick and I'll live with that, but you can't eat Limburger anymore. That's true, I didn't make that up. That's a true story. Colby, so that's another Wisconsin original. It was invented in Wisconsin in the little town of Colby, which is northwest of Marshfield, by Joseph Steinwang. I did one of these presentations a few years ago in Minnesota. An elderly gentleman came up to me later and said that he had worked in that factory. He didn't know Joseph Steinwang, but he worked in that original Colby factory many years ago. It's similar to making cheddar, except they pack it typically, historically, in cylindrical hoops, which look like this. So here's your next cheese question. What type of Colby, what do you call a Colby made in a hoop like this? That's correct, Longhorn. Because if you ever see cheese like this, or you usually see it cut in half, the half moon shape, that's Longhorn. Longhorn is only the shape. Colby could be Longhorn, cheddar could be Longhorn. Longhorn means it's made in a cylindrical shape like that. Okay. It's kind of like a very mild cheddar cheese. So, fast forward 100 years, how many of you know what kind of cheese this is? Yeah, all the above. Okay. Original name was Kojak. So you guys, most of you are much younger than me. What was a very popular TV show in the late 1970s? With Telly Savalas. Kojak. But also this cheese was made with Colby and with Monterey Jack. So the story goes, was it named after the TV show? Was it named after the Colby? And I think it was probably both. But here's how it happened. So there's a cheese. How many of you are familiar with Arena cheese, west of Madison? So that's where Kojak was originally made. But here's why. It was an accident. So they made Colby. And what color is Colby always? Orange, yellow, yep. And what color is Monterey Jack always? White. So at the end of the day, they made some Colby and some Monterey Jack. And they'd have this little pile of yellow-orange curd left over, but not enough to fill one of those hoops, and a little pile of white curd from Jack, but not enough to fill a hoop. But they had enough if they mixed the two together to make one more cylinder. So now what are they going to do with that cylinder of cheese? It's a true story, 1979. So if you know small-town Wisconsin, what three institutions are often in a small town in Wisconsin? A cheese factory, a bar, and a church, right? Well, the church didn't do them any good, but there was a bar next door. So they took the cheese to a bar and gave it. They knew the bar owner, gave it to him and said, just, cut it up and give it at the bar to your customers. They'll drink more beer, blah, blah, blah. He did. They loved it. They wanted to buy it. So they started making it, and even that relatively small factory makes tens of millions of pounds of Kojak a year today. Okay, so that's the story with the Wisconsin original, which is Kojak. Okay.
So having lived in Wisconsin and not a lot of other places besides Minnesota, do you find this cheese in other parts of the country? Or
Kojak?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That one's easy to find.
I'd start whipping out cheese names and then just
Now,
do that look.
Brick, no.
Right, okay.
Munster, no. Kojak, yes.
Detroit style pizza.
With brick. That's Wisconsin brick. That was on Wisconsin Foodie some months ago. That's right. That was a cool show. I'm switching gears now a little bit and talk about the role of UW-Madison, Picnic Point, University Bay, Ag Hall, Henry Mall. Okay, back in the day. Okay, we know about the Wisconsin idea where the boundaries of the campus are the boundaries of the state. We're trying to use the knowledge generated at the university to help the state's people, the state's economy. So I already mentioned this, but I'll quiz you again. The dominant dairy state from 1850 to 1910 in the US was New York, right? New York. So, where do you think we got where the University of Wisconsin-Madison stole their early people with dairy knowledge from? Cornell University in New York, or other places in New York, and all these people came from New York. And one of special note, including Horde, but I'm going to talk about Stephen Babcock. I'm assuming many of you have been to Babcock Hall, which is where I work, and where, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce Heather Cooper, my colleague and assistant over there, who will help you with the tasting later. But Stephen Babcock came in 1888, okay, from Cornell University in New York, right? So also our first Dean of Agriculture and our first Professor of Agriculture, W.A. Henry, came from Cornell. 1883, our first experimental farm opened, where we started, trying to find new practices for raising cattle and livestock. The College of Agriculture was formed in 1889. Way back in 1885, they started the corporate extension program at the university, and the first farm short courses where they brought farmers in to teach them new practices. And again, in 1888, Stephen Babcock came. That's a picture of him there as an older man. And within 2 years, he had developed the Babcock fat test. So why was that important? So I was raised as a boy on a dairy farm, and this is from our farm. We were patron number 8. This is a milk can. How much milk, how many gallons fits in this can? 10, which would weigh 85 pounds, just the milk, and the can itself weighs about 25. By the way, how did we cool the milk? Sorry?
Water tank.
Water tank, cold water tank, exactly right, okay? But back before Babcock's time here, okay, this went to a cheese plant or a butter plant or a bottled milk plant or something. How would they pay me if I was the farmer? How would they pay me for the milk? By weight or volume, which is essentially the same thing. By weight or volume, okay? Well, you asked me before about the different breeds. Well, it turns out the Holsteins give, as you said, the most milk, but the Jerseys and the Guernseys and the Ayrshires and the milking Shorthorns and the Brown Swiss give the richest milk, higher in fat and higher in protein. So if I had this can filled from a Holstein farmer and another can just like it filled from a Jersey farmer, I would get much more cheese or butter from processing the Jersey milk than the Holstein milk. So is that fair and is that equitable to the Jersey farmer? No, okay. Also, another practice, so people are people. So if I was a farmer and I needed a little extra money, what would I be tempted to do? Add water to my milk, because nobody could tell the difference, right? So Babcock, his first charge was to come up with a simple fat test. And this is his test. It's one of these Babcock bottles. This is one for milk. They have different bore diameters, so a wider one for cream, because there's more fat in cream, a narrower one for milk. Okay, so how did it work? Very simple. They put 9 milliliters of milk in here. Then they put 9 milliliters of concentrated sulfuric acid, and they put it in a shaker. And the sulfuric acid would dissolve everything in the milk except the fat. And when you mix, if any of you have had chemistry, you mix acid with water and you generate heat, which would melt the fat, so the fat would come to the top. Then you'd add some warm water to bring the fat up into the neck. And then you'd spin it in a centrifuge to make sure all the fat came to the top. And then when I pass it around, you'll see there are graduate, like a yardstick or a ruler. There are lines here. It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% fat. They would measure it, and that would tell the cheese plant or the butter plant the fat content of the milk from every individual farmer.
Question.
Yep.
So I used to help with the samples that we would take of all cows.
Okay.
Is that basically what there was a pill in it or something that
Okay?
Something that was in there that you had to shake it.
That's right. So what you're talking about, and I did the same thing many years ago. So what they would do is they would make composite testing. So what they would do is they wouldn't test milk every day. They would take a number of days' milk from the same farmer, put it in a glass container that had a little pill in that was a preservative, so that the milk didn't go sour and get nasty. It was a preservative. And then they would test maybe once a week, every farmer, because it takes a lot of labor to do that test. They do it like once a week to get the average fat test over the course of a week for every individual farmer. Yeah. So, he invented that in 1890. How long did that test remain the standard milk fat test in the world? Until 1980. 90 years. So this test was invented before the airplane, before the automobile, and it was still the major milk fat test until about approximately 1980. 90 years. That's kind of amazing when you think about it. So the next quiz question is, how much money did Babcock and the university get for this wonderful test? 0, because he dedicated it to the betterment of mankind. Okay? So he was just that kind of guy. So it was a famous test, but it was more important than just telling the milk plant, the cheese plant, the butter plant, the fat content. Now, when you have that, back to someone else's question, now a farmer could try different feeding practices to see what it did to the fat content of their milk. And they could breed different bulls to their cows to see which bulls gave higher fat content to their milk. So it changed the whole industry. It changed the nutrition industry. It changed the processing, butter, cheese making part. It changed the breeding part. It advanced the whole industry worldwide. And he was actually known as the Thomas Edison of the dairy industry. He had a lot of other important work that he did as well.
So
Okay?
are dairy farmers striving for milk that is a higher fat content? But you said that.
Absolutely, yes.
But the Holstein was the dominant, which doesn't have the fat content.
It seems contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it isn't, and I'll tell you why. Here's the Holstein produces more total pounds of fat per lactation because it produces so much more milk and more total pounds of protein as well. So if a Holstein, and I can't do the math that quickly in my head, so let me back up. What's a lactation? What am I talking? You probably don't know. Okay, what has to happen before the dairy cow can give milk? It has to have a baby.
Yeah.
It has to have a baby, okay? Well then, we don't just milk that cow forever. We milk it for 10 months. That's one lactation. Then the cow isn't milked and it's rested for 2 months. And then it has another baby, and then you start that process all over again. So a lactation is 10 months of milking of a cow, okay? So if a Holstein produces 25,000 pounds of milk at 3.5% fat, a Jersey might have 4.5% fat, but might only produce 15,000 pounds of milk. I can't do the math that quick in my head, but the point is the Holstein always produced more pounds of fat per lactation. That's why they were preferred, okay? Even though on any given day, the milk from a Holstein has lower fat than the Jersey, but it produces, 50% more milk total, something like that. Maybe not quite that much. So, I talked about that. It was a pivotal moment in the U.S. dairy industry. That's why Babcock Hall was named after him. It was so important, okay? So, before Babcock Hall, if those of you are familiar with campus, what's the name of that building? It's right behind the micro building. It's still standing. Hiram Smith. Okay, the back T building, the new one is right there. So in the 1890s and for decades, the university ran 2-week training courses in dairy manufacturing. how to make butter, how to make cheese, how to make ice cream, how to make cream, how to bottle milk, all those things. And this is a class, they're all doing a cream separator to separate cream, and here's a class in lecture. So why do I show that picture? Well, here, I'll pass this around because it's the same picture that's there. You can get a little closer look at that. But the reason I want to show you that is a number of years ago, I got a phone call out of the blue from a lady in Oshkosh that said, my great-grandfather was in the class of 1906. I have his uniform. Do you want it? And I said, absolutely. What does it say embroidered on the collar in red? Yeah, so I'll pass this around. And it's actually bib overhauls, like bibs, and then the stack. Now, I don't have their hat. She didn't have the hat anymore, but that's, so I should, eventually that's going to end up in the State Historical Society, but after I retire, they can have it. But anyway, that's what it looks like. But here's the point. So, how many of you know about Baker string cheese? The original Baker went to this, okay? Henning's cheese, Keogh, Wisconsin. The original Henning, that's now 4th or 5th generation cheese making working there, went to this class. There used to be a Zander's Buttery in Cross Plains, went here. There's a huge butter plant called Grassland Dairy, owned by the Wheat Rakes up in northwestern Wisconsin. Greenwood, their ancestor went here. Many of Wisconsin factories, even existing, still running factories, their ancestors learned how to make cheese or butter in these classes back then. Okay? So by 1910, Wisconsin became the leader in cheese production in the United States. By 1915, the leader in milk production, although now California makes more milk, we still make more cheese. By 1916, Wisconsin cheesemakers were required to pass a test and be licensed by the State Department of Agriculture. They still do. It's illegal today to make cheese without a licensed cheesemaker on site at all times. Okay. By 1921, Wisconsin had instituted mandatory grading of all major cheeses. What is grading? Sensory evaluation. So can you read that? What does that say? Can you read that? State brand. That means grade A, top quality, in this case, cheddar cheese. And there's 3 numbers there, 067. What does that mean? That's every individual grader has their own individual 3-digit number assigned to them. So that might be his number, because he's stamping those wheels of cheddar with a mark that looks like that. So,
Who are the graders?
so the Wisconsin Department of Ag has like 3 official top, they're the top cheese graders in the state. And then you can become a licensed grader by having enough years of experience and passing a written test, and then you pass a sensory test where one of the state top graders comes with samples and samples the cheese with you and sees if you can pick out flavors or not. So how do you sample a cheese? I don't normally do this, but I thought it might be cool for you to see. So let's pretend this is a piece of cheese and I'm an official grader. I teach official graders. So you have something called this device. This is a cheese trier, T-R-I-E-R. Okay? And worldwide, every grader of cheese uses an instrument that looks like that. So if I needed to grade this piece of cheese, what I do is I put it in there, I give it a half turn, and I pull it out, and I get a plug of cheese like that. And then I feel it, and I smell it. Bend it to see, how elastic it is, and then I pinch a piece off like this and work it in my fingers to see if it has the right consistency, and then finally I would taste it. So I'll just pass that around. Don't, everybody's gonna touch it, so don't taste it, but you can see that's how that process would work.
You went to the World Cheese Championships this year?
I was a grader,
You
yeah.
got to see them do that.
Yeah, yeah, I was there. I was a grader, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I was a grader.
Does the cheese have
We like to temper it to around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 to 55 Fahrenheit ideally, yes.
It's gotta be hard to do like Parmesan.
Yes, well, except I didn't bring my grade, they have different size triers. I did bring one other one there.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, I did. So we make some cheeses where I used to work in 700-pound blocks. You know, this weighs probably about 3 pounds, 700-pound blocks. Then you use a trier that looks like this. Okay. A Parmesan trier has a bore about a third the size of this one, and it's shorter yet, because it's so hard.
Yeah.
If you did these, it would corkscrew them. Okay. All right. So, 1922 was the top year for number of cheese factories in Wisconsin, 2,800 dotting our landscape. This is the Buckhorn Cheese Company. That building still stands. It's northwest of Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. It's not an operating cheese factory, but it still stands. And they always looked like this, typically, long and thin because the cheese vat was long and thin. And upstairs and downstairs, typically, you'd bake the cheese here and age it down there. Why would you age it down there? Cooler, because it's in the earth. And typically you had a high portion where the canned milk trucks would bring the cans up there, and then everything kind of worked its way down eventually to the lower level. So this is just a graph. I should update it because it only goes to the early 1990s. But remember, 1922, that's when we topped out in number of cheese plants. That's the blue line here. But then it rapidly declined. You used to see these at every crossroad out in rural dairy parts of Wisconsin. What happened here that caused that rapid decline in numbers of cheese factories? At the same time, though, the total poundage of cheese production was increasing, even though the number of factories was going down. What does that tell you about the size of the factories? Was getting bigger. What allowed them to get bigger after 1922? Two things. That's pre-depression. Okay.
But that's back when they
Here.
were doing assembly lines, right? Like the whole Henry Ford thing,
Mm.
factory.
Not quite. Well, kind of, but not quite. So during this period, how did the milk in the cans get from the farm to the factory?
Oh, horse and buggy.
How did it get there here?
Vehicle.
Vehicles.
Yeah.
So now the vehicles could go further, much further. Here, this was pre-electricity. Here, it was post-electricity. So now everything wasn't manual. You had pumps and you had motors and you had automatic stirrers and things, so factories could get bigger. So between cars and electricity, now you could have bigger factories much further apart, further away from the farms, okay? So this is where I used to work at Altoa Pond. When I started, it was actually the largest cheese factory in the country, okay? So 1972, Wisconsin produced 1 billion pounds of cheese. 1992, 2 billion. 2022, 3.5 billion pounds. Okay. So we're from the Center for Dairy Research. What we do is to turn knowledge and expertise into the dairy industry's success. By the way, we are funded primarily by dairy farmers. We're not funded by taxpayers. Only 5% of our budget, operating budget, comes from the state. Okay. So more timelines for us. 1976, we established the Walter Price Cheese Institute. He was the king of cheese in the U.S. at the University of Wisconsin from 1929 until the mid-1960s. And then this organization, the Cheese Research Institute, was renamed what we are now, the Wisconsin Center for Dairy Research, in 1986. One of the things that we do, among many others, is we lead the Master Cheesemaker program. What's that? So there's, I forget, something like 1,000 licensed cheesemakers in the state. But we take people who have been licensed for over 10 years, and who have demonstrated ability to make really high quality cheese. And we accept them into an educational program where they come back and take 2, 3, 4 day short courses, about 5 to 6 of them over the course of 3 years. And then they send their cheese in for an evaluation like I did here, so we make sure it's really good. And then they might be awarded a title called the Wisconsin Master Cheesemaker. It's the only program of its type in the United States and only one of 3 in the world. Two European ones have that. And we have about 90 masters. Now, when I was getting ready to come here today, I have a book. It's not up to date, but it's still pretty cool. It's a book of Wisconsin Master Cheesemakers, but it doesn't capture the last few years. My only disappointment was I didn't realize until I was coming here that you don't have a library, because I wanted to give you one of these books. You can still have one if you want to store it until you have a library. This is actually a brand new copy. That's a slightly older copy. So it gives their stories. They all have stories of how they became cheesemakers and why and things like that. Okay. So what do we do at this center? We do cheese research. We do research on processing equipment. We do research on ingredients like whey that are generated during cheese making, yogurt research, and quality research. We do all those types of things, okay? Who do we work with? Well, you don't realize it, but we work with tons of large food companies, restaurant chains, pizza companies, all kinds of different people. We're the largest dairy center in the United States by far, and probably one of the 3 largest in the world. Okay. Who do we work? This is who we work with. You know, these are customers. You know, even people like Kraft and Sargento and retailers like Whole Foods and stuff. But we work directly with the cheesemakers themselves. And here are some. Again, I don't know where you're all from, but here's Shelley. We work a lot with them. Craves in Waterloo. We help them along their way. Widmer's and Teresa, North Milwaukee. Decatur and Broadhead. Arena Cheese and Arena. Prairie Farms has a number of factories in southern and western Wisconsin. Klondike and Monroe. Foremost is now out of Middleton. They're the largest dairy co-op in the state. Emmy Roth out of Monroe. And many others. I picked some for this presentation that are more in this neck of the woods. Okay. Here's one point I'd like you to kind of note and take home. So the Wisconsin dairy industry generates $45.6 billion of economic activity in Wisconsin. So what agricultural product do you think of if you say Florida?
Orange.
Yeah, that's a $7 billion industry. We're 45. Idaho? That's a $3 billion industry, and we're 45 plus. So that's how important dairying is to Wisconsin. Specialty cheese. Most of the cheeses I brought here for you to try would be categorized as specialty cheese. Limited production, natural flavor and texture, high quality. Could be cow, could be sheep or goat as well, milk. Might be flavored. And when the center started, there was very little specialty cheese production, and it's really taken over. Currently, I think I have a slide coming up, but Wisconsin produces 50% of the specialty cheese in the United States. Okay? It says 48, but this slide is slightly old. It's 50 now. I told you we're the only master cheesemaker program. Just over 1,000 licensed cheesemakers, 600 varieties and types of cheeses. Okay? And we typically win more awards than any other state and then even any other country in world contests. Okay? And despite what a lot of people might think, most of our cheese factories are family owned, and many of them are fourth generation going on 5th. Okay? So here's an interesting fact too, which confounds people. If Wisconsin was its own country, we would be the 4th largest cheese producing country in the world.
But on that,
More than Italy, more than Russia, and a number of other
in
countries.
this graphic, does that take Wisconsin out of the United States?
I believe it does, yes.
So it's Wisconsin, or it's the United States minus Wisconsin?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Correct. Okay, so again, specialty cheeses, artisan, unique, you know, the cheesemaker's skill. I mean, it's kind of the difference between going to a fast food restaurant and fine dining. You know, to be a specialty cheesemaker is like fine dining, a top chef type of thing, really. And much of it is like, there's a lot of comparisons between a artisan cheesemaker and a top quality chef, okay? Again, the specialty cheese, this is the percent of Wisconsin cheese that is specialty, and now at 2024, it's at 25%. Okay? So a little bit about its development, and the CDR has been involved with that. So that book that I passed around has some of these, that's this book right here. This is Andy Hatch, okay? And I brought some of his famous cheese. That recipe was actually developed at the Center for Dairy Research. The guy that started that was not Andy, his predecessor, Mike Gingrich, used to work, he was an electrical engineer for Xerox in California. And for whatever reason, he said, I want to be a cheesemaker. So he chucked his Xerox career, came to Wisconsin, visited with my colleagues at the center, and said, I want to make cheese. What type should I make? And we said, you have to decide that. You decide that, we'll tell you how to make it. So we traveled throughout Europe and found a cheese in France, in the Alps, French Alps, called Beaufort, B-E-A-U-F-O-R-T. It's very similar to Gruyere or Comté cheese. Brought some back, gave it to us, we developed a recipe with him, took it out, started making it, and 1 year out of the block, 1 year after starting to make it in 2000, he won Best of Show at a national cheese, one of the big national cheese contests. And he's won 3 more since. No cheese in the world has ever won 4 Best of Shows. Meaning, if there's 2,000 cheese entries, from blue cheese to cheddar to brie to parm to string to whatever, Gouda, whatever, at the end of the day, one of them is the best of everything. He's won that 4 times with this cheese. That's this one. You get to taste it if you want later. So their farm is just north of Dodgeville on Highway 23, just north of Governor Dodge State Park on the east side of the road.
So is he the only one able to make that cheese?
Yeah, and call it that, yes.
So it's kind of like champagne, otherwise it's just sparkling disappointment.
Yeah, Pleasant Ridge Reserve, that's his copyrighted name.
Okay.
Yep.
How easy is it to replicate a cheese that's produced in another country?
It's not easy.
Well, I mean, it's like different climate.
Different milk, different area, different. It's not easy, but that's what we do. That's what we help figure out people do. This is the original Mike Gingrich. This is the current owner, the second owner, Andy Hatch, with their cheese.
So are these trade secrets then?
Yes. Yeah, if I shared his recipe,
You'd be.
I'd be told. I'd be told. Even though we developed it, I'd be told. Okay. Seymour. Seymour is a fairly small community, I think around 5,000 people, just west of Green Bay. So there has been a cheese plant in Seymour forever. Originally it was a Swiss cheese plant. I brought a piece of Swiss cheese. We're not going to taste any. What do we call these things in Swiss cheese? Nope. We don't call them moles. Nope. Eyes. They're called eyes. What do we call a piece of Swiss? I'm not kidding. Swiss cheese with no eyes. Blind. No, I'm serious. That's what cheese. If I was a grading Swiss and had no eyes, it's blind. That's a defect. What causes the eyes?
Air.
Not bacteria. Bacteria producing gas, carbon dioxide gas. Okay. So this factory was, for decades and decades, a Swiss cheese factory. Then it was bought out by Beatrice Cheese, and they started making provolone, and then they closed it. So that's a factory that probably had 40 employees. What do you think that does to the economy of a town of 5,000 people? Nothing good, right? So it was closed for about 7, 8 years, 9 years, and then a cheesemaker with an investor behind him bought it. and he said, I want to make blue cheese. Mike Brennenstuhl, we knew him. I want to make blue cheese. He came to us and we said, that sounds really good. This was right around 2003. And I just started at the center. Really good, good idea. He said, but I have a problem. What's your problem? I don't know how to make blue cheese. So we can solve that. So we taught him, helped develop recipes. He became award-winning. And of course, what happens when an investor invests in something and it takes off like a rocket? Because within 6 years, it was the second largest blue cheese factory in the US with 50 employees when they started with 2 employees. What does an investor do when all of a sudden his business went gangbusters? Sells it to get the, so it got sold. So now Emmy Roth owns it. But anyways, they're still making blue, still a great factory, and I brought some of their cheese for you to try. Hordes, I talked to you before about Hordes. They are famous for Guernsey cattle, okay, like that. My favorite breed, actually. So I brought some of their Bel Air cheese, which is kind of like a soft Munster for you to try. How many of you know of this cheese? Oostalipa, otherwise known as Finnish bread cheese, okay. A couple of my colleagues came across by accident a small factory in Upper Michigan that was making it back right around, late 1990s. And then we figured out a recipe, shared it. Now a number of Wisconsin factories are making this bread cheese. Traditionally, so we're not going to get to try it tonight. I brought some, but you have to warm it. And we don't have a microwave, so I can't warm it. I can't warm it. You can take some home with you. I got plastic bags, but you have to warm it. Oostalipa is Finnish. It literally translates to bread cheese. What type of milk did the Finns originally use to make it? What animal, what breed of animal? Reindeer. Reindeer up in Lapland, the northern parts of Finland. Okay. Craves, Waterloo, started making cheese right around 2000. They worked very closely with us, the center, to develop recipes for their fresh maz. I brought some of that for you to try as well. Red Barn is a small cooperative. Red Barn, when we say Red Barn in our industry, we mean the traditional small farmers that still use little red barns, right? Okay, so it's a group of them up in the Green Bay area, but they came to us and we developed about 6 different cheese recipes for them. They don't have their own cheese factory, but they have different little factories up in that area make it for them. In the US contest, like 3 years ago, they won, I think 2 years ago, they won second runner-up for best of show. So the 3rd best cheese out of 2,000 cheeses. I brought some of that for you to try as well. This is Chris Raleigh. He's got a small factory just outside of Shullsburg, Wisconsin, southwestern Wisconsin. It's his wife, who's also named Chris. He wanted to make a raclette-style cheese, which is a Swiss Alpine cheese. And we developed the recipe working with him. And he developed it. That's him there in his cheese aging room. And it's called Little Mountain. There's 2 big contests in the United States, the Wisconsin Cheesemakers and the American Cheese Society. And he won the American Cheese Society Best of Show with Little Mountain in 2016. I was sitting right next to him in the audience when it was announced. I thought he was going to faint. He never saw it coming. Okay. Sartori, based in Plymouth, Wisconsin, but they have a Parmesan plant in Anago, Wisconsin. They've come up with a sweet cheddar called Montemori, which has characteristics of both aged cheddar and aged Parmesan flavor notes. We have some of that for you to try.
Are they able to call it Parmesan here though?
Yes, we can. We can call it Parmesan. What we can call it is Reggiano Parmigiano.
Thank you.
And we can't call it Grana Padano, which is another Italian Parmesan. But we can call it Parmesan. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So they've developed Bellavitano, which is kind of like a sweet, high moisture Parmesan, typically flavored. This one is black pepper. I think we brought espresso, which is coffee, and Merlot, which is wine flavor for you to try. We do other products as well. Odyssey Greek yogurt is made at Klondike. So Klondike's a story. They originally were Swiss cheesemakers, and then they couldn't make money at that, like a lot of people couldn't. And they switched to cheddar, and they didn't like that. And then they switched to mozzarella. They didn't like that. And then they went to Munster, which was pretty good. They still make it. And ultimately to feta. And they're one of the, I think they're the second leading maker of feta cheese in the United States today. But then their customers like their, what country is famous for feta cheese? Origin? Greece, yeah. So their customers said, we love your feta. Why don't you make Greek yogurt? And they're like, yogurt? We don't know how to make Greek yogurt. But we taught them how. And then they developed their own process. And now they make Odyssey. And we have some for you to try if you'd like. I couldn't find this yesterday when I was shopping, but Yodel is made just south of Madison. That's a specialty yogurt made in Dane County. Badger Max was a sports drink developed with the UW athletic program. Smari was a Icelandic yogurt, which is like Greek yogurt on steroids. Rapid Whey was a whey protein fortified Door County cherry juice. And Good Sport takes minerals, calcium and phosphorus from milk and fortifies it into flavored waters. So this is essentially a better, my opinion, better product than Gatorade. More effective, what do you call those products? Rehydration product than Gatorade. Okay. Positioning for the future. Babcock Hall was built in 1950. It was the first building built on campus after World War II. The dairy plant, which is this part right here, so then dated to that, so it was like 70 years old. That's where our research cheese making labs were in as well. Pretty old school, pretty old fashioned. So we just completed building a new addition to help carry our industry forward for the next 50, 60 years. So last slide, then we'll taste cheese. Why did Wisconsin become successful? We had the right soil, climate, natural rainfall, those immigrants from those dairy countries in Europe, and our partnerships with the farmers, the university, industry associations, the support of the state, and the creativity and just the can-do attitude of the families that developed a lot of these cheese and butter plants. That's what made it all happen. So, that's it. Again, we're primarily funded by dairy farmers. So our business is to better the economic lives of dairy farmers in Wisconsin. Yes, sir.
I was born and raised on a dairy farm in the 40s and 70s, and there was two grades of milk, grade A
Yep.
and grade B.
Yep.
It was my understanding that grade A, and of course you always had the milk inspector come to the farm, went to the fluid, what they call fluid milk, it went to the drinking. And
That's correct.
But B milk went all in the cheese.
That's correct. That's correct and still correct.
It's
But
still correct?
it's still correct. But, back, let's say back even in as recently, to me, as recently as the 70s, probably 25% of the milk was grade B. Today, in Wisconsin, today that percentage is probably like 2%. So it's almost all grade A. But grade B, even today, grade B milk, not a drop of it can go into drinking milk. Grade B milk has to go into cheese, but 95% of the milk that goes into cheese is grade A, because there's not enough grade B milk to.
Do they still have the milk inspectors come to the farm, even on B?
Yes,
It doesn't make any difference?
doesn't make any difference, the frequency is different. Grade A farm's supposed to be at least twice a year, grade B farm's only once a year.
Including the Amish?
Including the Amish, right, including the Amish, right? Oh, that's a good point. Do any farms in Wisconsin still use milk cans?
Amish.
The Amish do, yep. One last question before I turn you loose on the samples. what is this? I found this in an antique store and bought it, obviously. It was labeled as a coal bucket. Now, believe it or not, my first 4 years of school, I went to a little country school that had a wood-burning, coal-burning stove. So, and we had a wood-burning, coal-burning furnace at home. I knew what a coal bucket looked like because I used it a lot as a kid. This is not a coal bucket. What is it?
Isn't that the wash bucket?
Mm-mm. This is a hand milking bucket. When you hand milk cows, you know, have the underbelly and the udder, and sometimes there's dirt and straw there. You don't want that to fall down into the milk, so it falls here and falls off, like it shows in this picture, which is from a UW extension publication from many years ago. This is called a hooded hand milking pail to keep as much dirt and dust and stuff from getting in the milk when you're sitting there hand milking a cow like that.
So they haven't lost the udders like they do now.
No, not like they do today.
I mean, they did, but not.
Not like they do today.
Yeah.
Not like
No,
they do
it's
today.
sterile.
One other thing I have over there I didn't mention, another Wisconsin original is Coal-Pack cheese.
Oh, yeah.
I just want you to know, because most people think of this like they think of processed cheese, that maybe they throw some odds and ends in there. That's not true. Coal-Pack, there's no heat involved. This is like 95% cheese plus, and because they can add some, you know, some salt or some acid and a few other little things, but it's only the best cheese can go in the Coal-Pack. Yes, because there's nothing to hide a bad flavor.
Because there's other products.
Yes,
That come in those kind of
that's
things.
right. You gotta be careful.
You gotta look for it.
You gotta look,
Yeah, you gotta look for that.
you gotta look for Coal-Pack. It says Coal-Pack cheese food on there. You wanna see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's other products that look like this that are
You
garbage.
don't say Coal-Pack.
But if, the two big ones, if you want really good stuff, quite honestly, we're not being recorded. Pine River,
Yes.
Kaukauna, which makes Kaukauna and Merck's, they're both made by Kaukauna, in Kaukauna, and Pine River, which is in Manitowoc. Those are the two good brands. All right. Thanks for your attention. I'll be around if you have any more questions, but please, we brought a lot of samples. So help yourself to samples. And I know there's a lot more cheese than you can eat, and I have bags if you want to take a little something home.
Especially that. Now I know how to say it.
Who really wants a Ustolipa?
Oh, me.